You were the kid who actually liked school. While your classmates groaned through multiplication tables and history timelines, you found something comforting in the rows of books, the smell of chalk, and the rhythm of routine. The structure felt safe. The lessons felt like puzzles you could solve. More than that, you loved the quiet spark of understanding, the moment when an idea that seemed impossible suddenly clicked, not just for you, but for someone you helped. Maybe it began with your third-grade teacher. She saw something in you, really saw you, in a way few adults ever did. One afternoon, she leaned down and said you'd make a wonderful teacher someday. It was a simple comment, but for a child, it was like a prophecy. You held on to it like a seed, tucked away in your pocket. And at home, you began lining up your toys like little students. You repeated lessons you had just learned, mimicking your teacher's voice, scribbling fake report cards with crayons. It wasn't just play. It felt like stepping into your purpose. Later, in middle school, when friends dreamed about becoming doctors, lawyers, or engineers, you said you wanted to teach. Some of them chuckled, others nodded politely as if they hadn't heard you. Teaching didn't sound glamorous, but to you, it wasn't about prestige. It was about mattering, about being the adult who changed someone's life. By high school, that dream solidified. You tutored after class, helping classmates who couldn't make sense of fractions or essays. You didn't do it for extra credit. You did it because it felt right, because seeing confusion melt into confidence was addictive. You pictured your future classroom, posters bright on the walls, desks arranged neatly, students engaged and laughing. The kind of space you wished you had when school felt overwhelming. You imagined becoming the teacher students remembered decades later. So when it came time for college, you didn't hesitate. You chose education with the quiet certainty of someone stepping into destiny. Some people said that's noble. Others scoffed, good luck living on that salary. You ignored them. You weren't in it for the paycheck. You were chasing something purer, the belief that education mattered, that one good teacher could change everything. College confirmed your excitement. You studied classroom management, child psychology, Bloom's taxonomy. You felt ready, prepared. You believed the theories, the lesson plans, the checklists would carry you through. But what no one prepared you for wasn't the workload. It was the weight, the invisible, unspoken burden of becoming the adult a child looks to for safety, structure, and hope all at once. Still, when you walked into your first classroom as a student teacher, none of that crossed your mind. You were buzzing with anticipation. Your lesson was planned, worksheets printed. You even brought candy for an icebreaker. Then the bell rang, and chaos entered with 30 pairs of sneakers. Phones came out, backpacks half-zipped. Whispers drowned your carefully practiced introduction. Within minutes, the candy was forgotten, worksheets were crumpled on the floor, and one student was already asleep. You smiled through it like you had been told to. You pushed through the noise, pretending you didn't notice. But by the end of class, you picked up your work, your hours of planning, crumpled and abandoned under a desk. You told yourself it was just one bad period. But then it happened again and again. You thought students would be challenging. You didn't expect indifference. You tried everything. Group activities, personal check-ins, rearranged seating charts. Nothing stuck. They tested limits, rolled eyes, ignored directions. You asked for advice. Veteran teachers shrugged, "You'll find your rhythm." Another whispered, "Just make it to winter break." You thought teaching would feel like leading a team. Instead, it felt like performing on a stage where no one was watching. Or worse, where they watched but didn't care. Still, you cared. You revised lessons late at night. You arrived early, stayed late. A few students softened. One or two smiled. But just as progress began, another fight erupted in the back row. A curse word flew across the room. The principal dropped in for an observation and scribbled notes silently, leaving behind vague feedback, work on increasing engagement. That night, you stared at your reflection in the bathroom mirror. You remembered being that kid who played school with toys, who believed teaching was fun and fulfilling. But standing here now, with the weight of 30 restless lives pressing against you, it felt nothing like that dream. One afternoon, you broke down in the staff bathroom. No one saw the tears. No one graded you for the emotional labor. You washed your face, straightened your clothes, and returned to class. Because despite everything, you still believed. Believed you could become the teacher you once needed. Believed you could matter. You just never realized how hard it would be to get there. College had promised you preparation. In reality, it gave you exhaustion disguised as training. Your days became a relentless schedule. Lectures in the morning, field hours in the afternoon, papers to finish at night. You memorized terms like differentiated instruction and cognitive scaffolding. You analyzed classroom management models as though the right diagram could unlock the secret to reaching every student. But the reality of teaching never looked like the tidy theories on the page. Then came the practicum, the true test. You were assigned to a school 4 days a week, unpaid, expected to teach real lessons, control real behaviors, and build real relationships while under the sharp eyes of a supervising teacher. Some mentors were kind, others barely looked at you. You graded papers you hadn't assigned. You corrected work you hadn't taught. You spent evenings writing reflections on moments you were too tired to process. At home, your laptop became a pillow. Dinner was instant noodles, not by choice but by necessity. Friends with other majors joked about internships with salaries, jobs that ended when they clocked out. But you didn't get to clock out. Teaching followed you everywhere. Every empty moment became planning. How to prevent fights, how to reach the quiet kid, how to explain fractions for the 5th time without breaking. You smiled through it all because they told you this was the grind. What they didn't say was that it was exploitation, working for free, holding 2 lives at once, student and teacher. The imbalance chipped away at your confidence. You weren't sure anymore if the problem was the system or you. Stories circulated among your peers. One broke down in the copy room, another was berated by a mentor in front of students. You laughed together, but only to mask the fear that this was your future. And still, you pressed on, because quitting felt worse than struggling. Certification finally came, a degree handed to you with applause and handshakes. You should have felt triumphant. Instead, pride was tempered by fatigue you couldn't shake. It wasn't just academic rigor. It was emotional labor no one graded. They said, "Now the real work begins." And you knew they were right. Your first full-time teaching job arrived like a badge of honor. Your own classroom, your own desk, its drawer jammed, but it was yours. You hung motivational posters. You wrote your name proudly on the whiteboard. For a moment, it felt like you had arrived. Then the students filed in. 30 faces, maybe more. Some carried trauma. Some barely spoke English. Others had already decided school was a battleground. You were told to differentiate for all of them, to personalize every lesson, to hold attention while ensuring respect, while keeping everyone on grade level. It was like being asked to juggle while walking a tightrope in a storm. You poured yourself into creative projects, staying up late to design lessons that sparked engagement. You made extra copies in case someone forgot theirs. You sat with students one by one, building bridges with patience and humor. But it was never enough. The printer jammed. The lesson flopped. A student hurled insults across the room. You wrote referrals, sent emails to parents, waited for help that never came. Silence from home. Shrugs from administration. The cycle repeated. You tried. They resisted. You tried again. And then came the policies. More data to input, more meetings to attend, less time to prepare. You spent planning periods punching numbers into spreadsheets instead of writing lessons. You bought your own supplies when the budget ran dry. You stayed after school for students who never showed up, giving second, third, and fourth chances. Meanwhile, the public insisted teachers had it easy. Friends joked about summers off. You smiled politely, hiding the 100 ungraded essays in your bag. It was in those moments, the contradictions, that burnout seeped in. When the world saw laziness, but you saw sacrifice. When people mocked short hours, but you were awake past midnight crafting lessons. Still, you stayed. You stayed because behind the failures were glimpses of hope. The one student who said thank you. The one who cracked a smile after weeks of silence. You stayed because you remembered why you began. Yet each day chipped at you. A hallway fight, a student sobbing after class, an administrator observing your worst moment and leaving feedback like, try to increase engagement. You woke with a pit in your stomach, not from apathy, but from caring too much. And as you dragged yourself through another day, a question whispered, how long can I keep this up? Amid the exhaustion, the endless paperwork, and the constant second-guessing, something unexpected kept you anchored, the small, fragile victories no one else noticed. A quiet thank you from a student who never turned in homework. A parent's short email saying, you believed in them when no one else did. A tough, angry teenager who lingered after class just long enough to whisper, you actually listen. These moments didn't come often, but when they did, they were lightning bolts in the dark. They reminded you why you stayed, why you kept showing up when every fiber of you wanted to quit. Teaching, you realized, was never about instant results. It was about planting seeds in soil you might never see bloom. The years blurred together, marked not by lesson plans or policies, but by faces. The girl in the front row who always asked questions. The boy who never brought a pencil but filled his journal with raw, honest words. The student who strutted through school like armor, only to break down in your classroom when no one else was watching. These faces stayed with you, carved deeper than any data point or standardized score. The system never made it easy. Budgets were slashed, expectations rose. New curricula rolled in before the old one settled. Politicians pointed fingers. The public blamed you for every failing statistic. You stopped correcting them. You were too tired. But still, you showed up. You showed up through flu outbreaks, lockdown drills, and technology that failed more often than it worked. You showed up with fevers, with grief, with a hollow kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. You showed up not because the system rewarded you, it rarely did, but because deep down you believed someone had to hold the line. Over time, you became more than a teacher. You became a counselor, a mediator, a safe haven, a steady voice in a world that rarely offered stability. You taught math or history, yes, but also resilience, patience, and the quiet art of trying again after failure. You gave pieces of yourself no resume could capture, empathy, presence, fragments of your own energy that no one would ever pay for or measure. And still, many outside the classroom never understood. They dismissed it, diminished it. But the ones who mattered understood. Years later, some students returned just to say thank you. A note slipped under your door read, "You were the first person who made me feel seen." That was your true paycheck, the kind that couldn't be cashed but carried more weight than any salary ever could. Eventually, time caught up. Retirement loomed, or maybe you simply reached the end of what you could give. You packed the room slowly, each drawer a time capsule of your life. Old notes, scribbled thank yous, handmade cards, cracked world's best teacher mugs, tokens of invisible victories. You sat at your empty desk, breathing in the silence, and realized something profound. You didn't become a celebrity. You didn't go viral. You didn't make a fortune. But you showed up. You showed up for the students who were hardest to love. You showed up when the job offered nothing back but stress and paperwork. You showed up when no one else did. And in the end, that was enough. Because teaching was never about glory. It was about presence. About being there day after day so that a child had a chance to believe in themselves. That is why it sucks to be a teacher, and that is why it matters more than almost anything else.